My slobber won't go that far. You haven't turned the camera on yet, have you, Philip?
I just did.
Oh.
Sorry about that. I'm gonna turn it off.
No, too late. And this is a little loud. All right. Good morning and happy Father's Day. I was telling Debbie that on the way here this morning, my dad today, periodically his birthday falls on Father's Day, and he would have been 88 years old today. Would have. But thankfully, he is in heaven, in a much better place than being here. So, let's see. Brother Gallardo, would you mind go ahead and turn into Ephesians 4:21? And I would like for you to read that here in just a little bit. But we all, if we would all turn to 1 Timothy 4:15 and 16, we'll read that all together here in just a minute. At the end of the class, remind me, let's talk about Friday night coming up. Please remind me, okay? I know. Brother Lansdale, would you open us up in prayer, please? I mentioned last week that the next couple of weeks, the next 2 weeks starting today, is not going to be a pleasant journey. We are going to delve into the tendencies of our heart, the way our heart is, even as Christians, how wicked and sinful our hearts truly are if we want to honestly take a look at the view of man. It is not going to be pleasant. I think I even mentioned you may not want to show up on Sunday school next week if it gets that bad. But I got to stand here and teach it, so I got to take it. So but in the end, it will be a blessing because, again, there is a remedy. There is a way to get over our sinful hearts and get through it. So we want to see the biblical view of man, and what we find in our own hearts is what we'll be looking at. So we are going to need prayer. Those of you that have your study book, I'm getting ready to start part 4 next week. Me and my wife are using this as devotions, and it is really a blessing. It's turning some leaves, and we are seeing slight changes in ourselves. We talked about that Friday night or Thursday night, and that's a blessing. Again, a touch base about this was supposed to be a 13-week study. I reached out to Pastor, I said, there's no way. He said, I know there's no way for you to do it because I'm slow. Face it, I'm slow. I like to dwell on things and really get the point across, probably not for your sake, but for my sake, more than anything. Let's go ahead and read 1 Timothy 4:15 and 16 all together as a class. Meditate upon these things. Give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all. Take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee. I asked you to turn to Ephesians, didn't I? Okay. Last week we saw how Paul is teaching biblical change in 3 different areas of our lives, of our personal responsibility, that is. It is our personal responsibility as Christians to start the sanctification process, and Paul explains that. That the 3, and this will be the divisions in how we'll go through the class, with part 1 being the mortification of the flesh, and that's what we'll be studying today and next week, and then we'll break off and do division 2, which is meditation on His Word, and then the manifestation of Christ likeness. So we're going to dwell on the mortification or the death of flesh for the next couple weeks, and that's how we'll go through this class. So before we can move into pleasing God, though, we in any fashion, form, or way, we have to put to death our flesh. There's no way around pleasing God until we do that first. And would you go ahead and mind reading Ephesians 4:21 and 22?
If so be that ye have heard him and have been taught by him, that the truth is in Jesus, that ye may put off concerning the former conversation the old man.
So we see that we've got to put off the old man. We'll get into that here as well. This part, I didn't recognize we had all these things. Just got pushed through. In the last study unit, we were given a glimpse of the big picture of biblical change, and we compared that to working or working a jigsaw puzzle. You know, when we work a jigsaw puzzle, which is one of my favorite things to do, we have a box. We got a picture of the box of the puzzle. If the box has a hole in the middle of that box without the picture on it there, that puzzle's a whole lot harder to work. And that hole could be the right view of man. So if we are looking at the big picture and we don't see the biblical view of man, we're going to see a lot of things wrong in the sanctification process. We have to get that view of man, the biblical view of man and his heart down first. So we've got the wrong picture, and it's even worse if we have the wrong picture on the jigsaw puzzle box. It takes a long time, if it's even possible, to work that jigsaw puzzle, especially if it's a 1,000-piece or 5,000-piece. But anyway, you get the picture. We will see in study unit 2 the true picture of man as God gives it to us in the Bible, and we'll see what happens when people have the wrong picture. We're going to go through a few scenarios of when people have the wrong picture of man. So our objectives today and over the next couple of weeks, our objectives explain how the wrong view of man leads to wrong diagnosis of man's problems. We'll be able to do all these things. These are the objectives. Explain what is wrong with man and why trusting the heart of man is so treacherous. And we'll understand why submission to the authority of God has placed in your life is so crucial to your spiritual success. And the applications that we will learn by the end of this study, we'll be able to respond by recognizing areas of our own life where sin's destruction is already making headway. That's the scary part. Respond by repenting of any self-confidence and self-reliance you tend to have. That's going to be very important. We'll see that here in a little bit. Respond by turning to God in dependence to keep you from trusting in your own heart. So, session 2, this is recognizing the evil within. The evil within. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the ways thereof are death." Those words are also to a Christian. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to die. What that means, the word death here means that there is a separation between something. That word death. It's the ways thereof are actually the separation from God and His blessings towards us, our fellowship with God. So when we see things right unto us, we're separating ourselves from God Himself. We're separating us from the fellowship that we could be having with God. And although technically the old man has been crucified with Christ when we become saved, but sin's rule over us, it has been broken, but we still have some residual effect within us in our mortal bodies. We still have the sin nature. The power of sin has been broken, but we're still corrupted. Understand the picture there? So, even after I'm going to go ahead and get this all the way down so I don't have to flip through this. Even after salvation, we still, now this is in your, this is not in the handout you have yet. Thank you. Apologize for that. Getting ahead of myself. Oh, there is? I apologize. Just take what you need and pass it around there. There's 2 pages to this. Sorry about that. I've been printing front and back, and for that one I did not for some reason. Are we straightened out? Everybody got 2 pages? Okay. Okay. So even after salvation, we still have that indwelling principle of sin in us that corrupts every part of us, and those are the fill in the blanks on number 1. The indwelling principle of sin that is in us, it corrupts every part of us. Paul calls this the flesh. It is in constant conflict with the Spirit of God, and it represents everything within us that attempts to make life work apart from God. And it's the very source, the flesh is the very source of our tendency to dethrone God. That's what we're doing when we depend on self. We are dethroning God and putting ourselves on that throne. We're allowing ourselves to rule in our own lives. Number two there on your handout, something is desperately wrong with man. Something is desperately wrong with man. In this chapter today, we're going to kind of take a spiritual MRI to find out what's going on inside. Who's had an MRI? Anybody ever had an MRI? Pretty much everybody, now, it looks like. Where you go inside that capsule, and the MRI tells the technician on the other end what's going on inside. Much different than an X-ray. It tells where the blood's flowing. It tells it where it's not flowing. You can look into the muscles. And so that's kind of what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at the inside of man, and it's not going to be a pretty sight. The Bible's message clearly reveals the extent of what man's heart is capable of doing. And again, I'll mention this. You know what? The Bible reveals and offers man's only hope, and that is redemption. God not only redeems the Christian from the penalty of sin, but God continues renewing His image in us on an everyday basis if we allow it. The Bible's message not only reveals the extent of man's wickedness, but also offers man his only hope. Is that a fill in the blank? Okay, his only hope. So, to go there, we've got to get the view of man right. Getting the view of man right. Last week we talked about these people, the 4 people. We talked about them the week before too, I believe. But we talked about these 4 people. One had to have a new car. Another wanted a divorce. A girl wanted a boyfriend, and a dock worker wanted a new boss. Pretty much is what it was. Now, with all these, we did see some change, but it was not necessarily for the better. Not one of them understood the major change that's needed to take place that was in their own hearts. And unfortunately, most often, if not all the time, we believe a lie that dwells in our heart that says, I'm a pretty good person that messes up every now and then. That's what we believe. I'm a pretty good person that messes up every now and then. But the truth is, we are all pretty bad people who do right only by the grace of God. That's the truth. I've said the first thing myself. I'm a pretty good person. I mess up more often than every now and then. But the truth is, I'm a pretty bad person, and I only do right in the grace of God. The first 3 chapters of the book of Romans, it's no wonder that it opens up. You know, Romans is the book for salvation. But the first 3 chapters dwell on nothing but the sin nature of man. Doesn't even mention salvation. Not yet. We've got to get it through to ourselves that we are truly a wicked person. How many of you heard the word or the term, I know many of us have, that you got to get a man lost before he can become saved? That's the purpose of the first 3 chapters of Romans. The lost must realize he is lost and headed to a place called hell before he can throw out that lifeline of salvation, which is the blood of Jesus Christ. The same philosophy is for us as Christians. We have to completely understand that our hearts are wicked before we can throw out the lifeline, which is the sanctification process of getting the view of man biblically right. So the same thing holds true for a lost person. Before they can throw out that lifeline of salvation, they have to realize they're lost. With us that are saved, we have to realize that our hearts are truly wicked before we can throw out that lifeline of the sanctification process that starts when we're saved, but sometimes, most of the time, becomes stagnant as we move on in life. We have to continue that sanctification process on a daily basis. It is the responsibility of every Christian to search out that law. It's the indwelling sin that's in our own heart. Deep down, it's that indwelling sin that comes out when we are, remember, we're put in that hot water. That's usually when a lot of that comes out, is when we get in that hot water, the tea bag we talked about. Our obedience to Jesus Christ depends on this, that very thing, searching out that indwelling sin. The obedience depends on that. Our longing for grace depends on this as well. If the view of man is not right, we get a misdiagnosis in parenting. If the biblical view of man is not right, we get a lot of misdiagnoses when we come in for help. Even when we pray, if we don't understand that our heart is so wicked, we get a lot of misdiagnosis, and we head down the wrong road of a prescription to fix ourselves. So the misdiagnosis, we have a misdiagnosis in counseling. We're going to look at every one of these. I'm going to go ahead and get you to write them down here. We get a misdiagnosis in the local church. And we have a misdiagnosis in Christian education. So we'll touch base on all 4 of those real quick, starting with parenting. If the view of man isn't right, then we end up with misdiagnosis and then the wrong prescription for a cure. So again, we're going to talk about parenting first. All kinds of excuses for teenage rebellion are used by parents, and they are swallowed hook, line, and sinker. Parents believe their teenagers fighting a hormonal imbalance or struggling for independence from parental control. Some blame rebellion on peer pressure or low self-esteem, or some just blame it on immaturity. Those are all wrong diagnoses in parenting. The natural solution to these issues is for parents to batten down the hatches while they ride out the storms of raging hormones, or if independence is driving them in turmoil, parents will negotiate some kind of peace accord with their teenager around the house just to give them some more freedom. And in return for some civility around the house or cooperation from the teenager, they'll just give them a little bit more leeway to do things. And those parents who see peer pressure as the problem will try to restrict their teens from seeing certain individuals. That's not a bad thing, but that is not the proper diagnosis of the problem itself. Some parents notice what they call low self-esteem in a teen and will do everything they can to make them feel good about themselves. I see that all the time in parenting. And I'm not a parent, but I've been a child before. But I see it in other parents, not necessarily here, but work and in other places. It's all around us just to help that teen feel good about themselves. And then there's some parents who see their teen as immature, and they just hope someday they're going to grow out of that. Some of these diagnoses, hormones, the peer pressure, can certainly influence the teen's thoughts and choices, and they'll need to be addressed, but not one of them strike at the root of the problem. The problem is the teen's heart itself. In the issues that we just went over, they're not the cause of rebellion. In most cases, they just reveal what's going on inside the heart. Again, deep inside, that's that indwelling sin. And that's good news for a parent who understands God's view of the heart. Because that way they can begin to address it God's way. But we have to get that right. By the way, if a parent does not understand the nature of the heart themselves, they probably have some issues within their own hearts, with their own relationships. A parent's own anger, their moodiness, their sensuality, their selfishness, and deception causes far more damage to a teen's life than whatever the parents think is going on with the teen itself. It points right back to the parent. If the parent doesn't have it right first, how in the world are they going to prescribe a remedy for their teen? So remember now, we're talking about the nature of man's problems. If the biblical view of man is not right as well, we can give a misdiagnosis in counseling. From a worldly point of view, examples are like someone has low self-esteem, or someone's insecure, or he has damaged emotions. These are misdiagnoses in worldly counseling. He's got a codependency of some kind, or he's had a dysfunctional upbringing. How many times have we heard that in some of these teens? I'm not just picking on teens, don't get me wrong here. These are grown-ups too, that have gone out and shot up the theater or shot up this place or done some damage here and there. Well, that worldly counseling has always brought up their dysfunctional upbringing, which is not the root of the cause. It is a misdiagnosis in the teen itself. Or he has an inner child, and this list can go on and on. Not one of these theories come out of a biblical point of view, so therefore none of these solutions can be God-honoring. And by the way, they don't have a long-lasting effect. When a problem gets a worldly view in counseling, they'll never have that long-lasting effect. It's like the AA, the person that keeps going back to AA because the problem keeps coming up again and again and again. That's why our Hope Ministry is so important. It is a long-lasting effect. If they truly empty their heart out with that indwelling sin, that will work with anything. So, it is impossible, again, it's impossible to provide long-lasting remedies to all these different psychological disorders in the world without a full understanding of the deceptive and exceedingly wicked nature of our heart. The so-called worldly solutions avoid dealing with the inner corruption and the deception of the heart. They completely avoid that. Psychotic breaks, deviant sexual behaviors such as homosexuality, bestiality, sexual abuse. We have eating disorders, anxiety disorders, and again, that list goes on and on. We can never, ever find permanent repair without the view from heaven that says our hearts are deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That is found in Jeremiah 17:9. We have got to get that through to our heads, is our hearts are deceitful above all things. We can't just take that in passing. We need to dwell on that our heart is desperately wicked. And by the way, Christian theories of man's issues can be just as wrong when the same solution is applied. So not only the worldly point of view in counseling, but the Christian point of view in counseling can be just as wrong if the biblical view of man is not right. If it's not right, we can give a misdiagnosis in the local church. This is going to ring true with a few of us. In some churches where the true nature of the human heart is not understood and biblical discipleship is not seen as a sanctification issue, the wrong prescription to a diagnosis can be handed to a church member who struggles with some area of his life. Here's the example. There are churches out there that will tell this member that they wouldn't have such battles if they were out soul winning. They wouldn't have such battles if they were busy on a bus route. That seemed to be the remedy of a certain place that I know of. The involvement in the local church is not the remedy. It is a byproduct, don't get me wrong. It is a byproduct. But it is not a primary ingredient to sanctification. Sanctification is the prescription. The heart of this member must be addressed biblically before the problem of lust can be conquered, period. It has to go through the sanctification process. Once that starts happening, it starts affecting that indwelling sin in the heart. These other things like out soul winning or being on a bus route or being involved in any ministry within the local church, it has to be addressed. We mentioned the misdiagnosis in Christian education. Again, when the nature of man's problems are not biblically diagnosed, is this a fill in the blank right there? Biblically diagnosed. Sin cannot be seen in its heinousness, H-E-I-N-O-U-S-N-E-S-S, if you need that. The nature of man's problems are not biblically diagnosed and cannot be seen in its heinousness and its relation to all social ills and disorders. This holds true in Christian education. Bible standards, church covenants cannot be forced on an unbiblical view of man. Man's true nature is that he will go astray. That is our true nature, is we will go astray. Many believers in today's society believe the lie that whatever a man decides for himself is all right and no one should interfere with his decisions. But God wants a man to be accountable. God uses accountability to stimulate change in a person. I know that this is one of the hardest parts in my life to get through to myself is accountability. I don't want to be accountable to anyone. That is the indwelling sin in my heart. That's a hard one for me to get over. So that's something I've got to do. God uses accountability to stimulate that change. Accountability starts with the parents, then the teachers, and the church leaders. Eventually, man needs to see beyond these figures to the God, to whoever he has deputized to keep watch over you. Be it your wife, be it the pastor, or be it a deacon, anybody that you can ask them to help you to be accountable to. That's a struggle for me. I am so headstrong. It is wicked. Ultimately, man must realize that God is always watching and knows his actions, but it doesn't stop there. He knows the true intents of our heart. He knows the thoughts of our heart. Accountability is the constant watchfulness and enforcement behind every effective discipleship effort. If you're going to disciple someone, you must hold that someone accountable to you. Otherwise, there will be no change. They'll just drift through life. They must be accountable to you. And by the way, you must be accountable to that person you've put in that position. It is that enforcement. Man also needs constant reminders. How many times did God remind the children of Israel to do something? It was constant. Reminder, reminder, reminder. Oh, how forgetful we are. Every time I say how forgetful we are, I've said it many times, but we have to remind ourselves that 9/11 happened in America. That should be something that is just burnt into our mind. We need something to happen once a year right here in Oklahoma City to remind us of our 9/11 on April 19th, 1995. How wicked that was, but we have got to have reminders all the time or we completely forget. But God gives us examples of this throughout the Bible. He constantly repeated his standards and warnings to Israel who forgot the Lord or remembered not his commandments. We've read that many, many times in the Old Testament. They remembered not his commandments, or they forgot the Lord. He did that because his own chosen people needed to be reminded. Any leader or any teacher who feels their students are mature enough to bypass that accountability and constant reminding do not have an accurate view of the human heart, nor do they understand their own responsibility. Because there are many teachers, there are many leaders. It's really not the true definition of a leader when they do this. Managers, let's go that route. That completely bypass the accountability of the people that report back to them or the teacher that has the students. They don't hold them accountable. Do not take this lesson as a fully developed philosophy of discipline. That's not what this is. This is only barely touching on that. This lesson, it's really only to show that the biblical view of man is crucial, that is a fill in the blank, crucial to the leadership of any society of believers. The biblical view of man is crucial to the leadership of any society of believers. Is that not a fill in the blank? This is Unit 2. Boy. Okay, I'm sorry, it's not. I just had it underlined for my pronunciation. I apologize. I got to change that. No wonder I had a deer in the headlight look. Where's it at? Okay, so really, again, this lesson it's not the full philosophy of discipline. When we have the biblical view of man wrong, there are so many more misdiagnoses in life. We'll get all these out here. Some of them are, I can't believe I just did that. How many times have you said that? I lost count of how many times I do that. Probably on a daily basis or even a weekly basis. Hourly. I know I've said it many, many times. That even as a lost man, I said that. Now, how wicked was that thing that I did? As even a lost man, I was saying that. I can't believe I did that. And I know I've said that many times as a Christian. Once we accept the truth of the biblical view of our own heart, we should not be surprised that we had not said that even more. Again, once we realize how wicked and deceitful our own hearts truly are, we ought to be surprised that we had not said that more times in life. We also hear each other say things like, I can't believe anyone would do that. How many times have we said that just by watching or listening to the news? Especially in the area of child abuse. How could anyone do that? Once we understand the true nature of the man's heart, we'll understand. We'll see that. We'll understand. Another misdiagnosis we often hear is, I trust my kids. I trust my kids. They would never do something like that. Trust me when I say this. If we don't recognize the evil within, then that thing, when we say, my kids would never do something like that, that thing we're calling that is never outside the realm of possibility. It is never outside that possibility. It is always possible if we don't understand the nature of our hearts. I have often heard unbelievers say, I can't, now, this is a good one. I picked this up and I will be saying this to others. I can't believe God would damn anyone to hell. Is that a fill in the blank? Okay. I can't believe God would damn anyone to hell. A Christian with a biblical view of man's heart can humbly say, I'm surprised God would save any of us. That's our reply. That's the way our reply ought to be. And that would include me. I'm surprised God would even save me. When someone says, I can't believe God would damn someone to hell, our reply ought to be, I can't believe He would save anybody from hell. Because that's the truth. Once we understand the nature and the true nature of our own hearts. I'm going to keep saying that. Because all of us is deserving of His wrath and judgment. Every one of us. Or we hear, one of the misdiagnoses are, the devil must be really fighting me. As a Christian, we've said that. The devil must be really fighting me now because I'm going the right way here. Although Satan wants to see our downfall, it's doubtful that that evil one is really directing us or attacking us. It's really doubtful that Satan himself's really fighting us. It's more than likely what we are experiencing is the true strength of our sinful heart. Until we decide to do right and resist the power of the heart, we probably didn't understand the strength that it actually had. And we're going to use an example of a canoe. Anybody ever canoed? Canoed? When you get that canoe out in the water and start paddling along, you don't understand, you don't realize the strength of that river. But once you try to stop or try to go backwards, you're going to understand the strength of that water. And it's probably going to be almost impossible to go against the current. If you're floating along at a good pace, it is impossible to go against the current with your own strength. When we've been going on with the flow of our own sinful heart for so long, we'll never understand the extent of the power of it until we turn from it. Then we're going to understand the power of our own heart when we start turning against it. And we're going to realize that we cannot do it on our own. It's impossible. We cannot go against the current on our own. We must learn that we need God. Bottom line. And we're going to talk about the nature of our own nature. This will be interesting. The nature of our own. We're not even going to make it through lesson 2. I want you to notice the unflattering picture God paints in the unredeemed human heart in Romans 3:10 through 18. Let's take time to look at this. This is where really the rubber meets the road when we see the picture that God paints of an unredeemed person. Romans chapter 3, verse 10 through 18. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. That is so important. There's the bell. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. Again, this is talking about the unredeemed. They are all gone out of the way. They are all together. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. This is what we are up against. Paul in this message is describing the hearts of unbelievers, but it's also a picture of our sinful tendencies. So this is the heart of an unbeliever, but it is also our tendency as we become saved. Again, remember, we still have a corrupt body. We still have a corrupt until we meet Jesus face to face. Its power over us is broken when we're saved, but it's still present with us and still has an influence in our lives. The power of sin still has an influence in our lives. I am so sorry. We are not going to get through this, and we still have a little ways to go, but I feel it's important to really touch on all this. Real quick, let's talk about, thank you. She was supposed to remind me. Let's talk about our get-together Friday night. How many are going to be here? Will you? We decided we're going to do walking tacos. I'll take care of the Doritos and the ground beef. We'll need chopped up tomatoes and shredded lettuce, chopped onions. Okay. Cheese? Cheese? Okay. So, would you do cheese and sour cream? Would you bring refried beans as a side? Now that doesn't go in the taco bag, but we can have refried beans as a side. What else? Salsa? A couple of mild and a hot. Mild and a hot. And anything else that we can think of. Oh, we'll need some drinks as well. I'll talk to Brother Holly. Brother Holly is out east today with his father for Father's Day. I'll talk to him about bringing something to drink if he's going to be here, and if not, we'll pick it up. So, we are adjourned. Thank you. Oh, if you want to bring dessert, your choice. Bring dessert. I know you.